Hello, everyone. I'm David Blake with Book Club, where we seek to go deeper on your favorite books with the authors themselves. Today, we're here with Kyle Garman, the author of The Entrepreneurial Mindset. Kyle, in the introductory of the book, you dedicate this to the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, or NIFTE. Tell us who is NIFTE and tell us more about the organization and why you dedicated it to them.
Well, Dave, first of all, it's so great to be here on the bookclub.com platform, and congrats on your success on the launch. You mentioned NIFTE, and I do dedicate this book to NIFTE. In fact, 100% of the proceeds from the book go directly to NIFTE as charitable contributions. So NIFTE is a nonprofit organization. We've reached over 1 million students, typically in the middle and high school level, where we teach project-based entrepreneurship to these students in the classroom. And so we've seen just a tremendous amount of results in shaping the students' mindsets. And we're 33 years into it. We've reached 1 million students, and now we're on our way to the next phase of our growth here.
Kyle, in the introduction, you tackled the reality that our current education system just isn't setting up today's youth, today's students for the future. Talk to me, how do we frame the thinking about what it's going to take to change that as we think about the 21st century skills that are required for today's students to be successful? How do we frame what's going on right now and how it needs to look different in the future?
Yeah, well, Dave, I think you and I share a passion about the future of work and lifelong learning and preparing our next generation for this tsunami of change, that we have upon us. And I think what's really changed is this exponential pace of disruption across so many different dimensions, technology and otherwise. In the book, I use an analogy of sort of the left brain and the right brain. And it's, of course, not scientifically accurate, but if you think about the left brain as sort of convergent thinking, methodical thinking that is often encapsulated in STEM-type concepts, this is exactly where intelligent machines are encroaching upon humans in the future of work. And by contrast, if you think about the right brain, so this is where you think about creativity and innovation and emotional intelligence, flexibility and adaptability, holistic problem solving, imagination, and so on, collaboration, communication with other people. This is the area which is so difficult for intelligent machines to automate. And if you look at the way our school system was designed, it's primarily focused on what I would call left brain thinking or convergent thinking. It's designed to teach students to get to the right answer on a test. And my proposal is that I think through the education system, we can do a lot more by focusing on these right brain capacities, what I call in the book the entrepreneurial mindset. And I think that's a way to prepare our young people for the future of work, because at the end of the day, these are the capabilities that intelligent machines are going to have a much harder time automating.
I just know personally that resonates with me. My whole passion for lifelong education came in large part because I found the skill that school taught me was how to take tests, how to, get to that right answer. But when I made it, beyond school, there was things I wanted to do, and I didn't really know how to even just frame out how to block and tackle on sort of pursuing my dreams and my ambitions. And in so many ways, I feel like school turned me into kind of like almost the exact opposite of what my career of entrepreneurship has required of me. So, very much resonate with that. In today's world, we've got to get past the answer that Siri or Alexa, all these smart devices in our pocket, they know the answer to, and how do we get past that? And I think entrepreneurship, it's done that for me, and you're advocating for that for others. Early in the book, you share a couple of incredible stories, but one in particular, Dagam Gurma, stood out to me, that illustrated this entrepreneurial journey and education. Share a little bit more about their story and, why you decided to share it so early in the book.
Yeah, so David, in chapter 1, I title it Altering Trajectories. And it's really about this idea that project-based entrepreneurship education can truly transform a mindset of a 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old student, and really just completely change the trajectory of their life. So Dagam is a perfect example of that. He and his family immigrated from rural Ethiopia to the United States, close to about the time he was born. And he talks about the first 10 years of his life being so difficult with this cultural adaptation, and he was shy and always asking, why is it that my family is so different than the world I now know here in the United States? And he had some entrepreneurial instincts early on. He sort of did some coding and, played games, but he always thought to himself, I have to wait till I'm an adult to actually pursue these things. And he sort of, left it aside. And so he gets to high school, and he goes to T.C. Williams, which is the famed movie Remember the Titans, and Denzel Washington, great story, great movie if you've seen it, about different races coming together towards a common goal. And so he's raised in this environment here in the United States, in a sports crazed town with this big flagship movie all around him. And he's a great athlete, good tennis player, but he's not going to be the star of the football team. And so he goes into an entrepreneurship class his junior year, and he has this idea, and he called it the Audible. And what he did was he brought his friends together to blog together on a platform about sports, around local sports, around professional sports, around college sports. And he built this business model to share the revenue from the advertising. The whole way he came to this, though, was the starting point was his project-based entrepreneurship class, which was provided in this case by Nifty. And it empowered him to take his idea and turn it into a real business plan. And so fast forward a little bit, he goes all the way through the competition. He's a finalist. He gets to meet President Obama at the White House as one of our top 3 finalists. And so it sort of shapes his entire mindset. He ends up going to Babson and getting a full ride, a school that he never would have heard of. Babson is a very well-known school for entrepreneurship. Gets this amazing experience at Babson, and now he's the digital product manager for Goldman Sachs's consumer banking division, which is a totally new branch of Goldman Sachs. And so if you ask him, the pivotal moment that changed the trajectory of his life was his junior year in high school, when his teacher said, hey, you know what? We're here to think of an idea. It's your idea, not mine, your idea as the student. Build a business plan around that, and then the rest is yours. I'll guide you and coach you on the way. I'll provide you with mentors along the way. I'll help you prepare for this competition. But that was kind of the starting point. And if you talk to him today, he'll say that that was the pivotal moment that really changed the trajectory of his life.
I mean, hearing you say that, at school, that's almost the exact opposite of, again, that's that convergent, divergent thinking. At school, we're so often trying to get all the students to the same point. And yet letting students embrace their own project, their own idea, that's so divergent. And most teachers just aren't really set up for that. But as you shared, it changed his life. One of the other things you talk about quite a bit is the confidence of just young students having to own their idea, be on stage, public speaking, and sharing something that is kind of uniquely their own. And I watched the video of their pitch on stage, sharing the website, and you can just see that sort of budding confidence. What is it about entrepreneurship that can give students, this confidence in a way that standardized testing or sort of convergent schooling, can?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's at least 2 things. I mean, the first is the centerpiece of entrepreneurship education is that it's the student's idea that you start with. So it's not a prescribed curriculum that someone else has determined that you should learn. And so what does that do? What is the message to a student? What is the message to a student with that in mind? It says what you care about and what you're passionate about and what you want to focus on actually matters, because it's the centerpiece of the whole educational experience. So you're right, it's the exact opposite. It's the 180-degree opposite of the typical educational approach. And then the second thing is, once you start with that sort of passion-driven learning, you've got a teacher that is effectively the coach, walking them through the process of building their business plan. But that teacher then connects them to a network of mentors that is sort of custom designed relative to their areas of interest. And so you're getting the coaching from the teacher, you're starting with your idea, not someone else's. Then you're building this network of mentors that is helping you, bouncing ideas about what your business plan should be. Are you thinking about this right or this right? Are you missing this element or that element? And then you're preparing them to compete in front of what ultimately is an audience of 1,000 or more, business leaders in the local community and then in a national competition. And so what you have there is this learning method, which again starts with the student's interest. You've got a coach, which is the teacher. you've got these mentors, and then you've got a competition. And through that process, which is typically a year-long process, there are lots of different dimensions to the educational experience, but within 1 year, you can go through that entire process. And what happens at the end? Number one, the student now has a passion-driven learning process. Number two, 75% of people in the United States, their biggest fear is public speaking. Number two is dying, to give you an idea of how much people fear getting in front of people. Well, by going through this exercise of building your business plan with your coach and your mentors, and then practicing over and over again to present in front of an audience of business leaders, that builds the confidence because you've got this whole network around you. And so basically that educational experience, in my view, is the quintessential learning method for preparing young people for the future of work.
Yeah, well, and it's such a reflection of what we have to do in our careers, as we know. I mean, to be successful as an adult, you have to interact, you have to engage, you have to be out there, you have to, as we look at the design of our education system, it's no coincidence. It was designed in an era that reflected the industrialization of the age. Talk to me just about that model and sort of the consequences we're living through right now of, the design of our education system and sort of the era and age it was designed for.
Yeah, I mean, I dedicate chapter 3 to this topic of, I call it taking a step back. And it's really looking at the education system, K through 12 in the United States, through the lens of its origins, which is in the mid-19th century. Horace Mann is known as the father of public schools in the United States. He brought over from Germany the Prussian model for education. And I talk about 3 design principles that went into the initial modeling of what public K through 12 education should be. And one of them is a focus on convergent thinking, because if you think about what skills are required for the industrial era, being able to do things over and over and repeatedly and getting to the right answer on an assembly line or in a factory, that's really critical. And so that became a foundational element of the way the school system was designed. But there's other aspects of this as well. For example, I talk about the notion of information scarcity versus information abundance. And the whole educational system was designed in an era of information scarcity. It was only within the last 20 years where we have more information in our phone, in our pockets, in our phone, and we've got access to this. And so if you think about what that means, is the educational system was designed that there was value for a teacher to learn something and become an expert, and then transfer that expertise to a student where they could then learn that and then show their expertise on a test. But now today, we're in this era of information abundance. Information effectively has become a commodity. And so learning facts is as simple as just asking Siri, as you said, or searching on Google. So it's a commodity. Knowing information is no longer valuable. What is valuable is what you can do with that information. And so, again, there's a few other design elements to the way that the system was designed, but there's all these sort of design factors that went into it. And many of those design principles are still in place today in the public K through 12 educational system. I think the consequence is, Ken Robinson is, viewed 60 million times on TED, the TED Talk, and he talks about we're killing creativity in our students by focusing so much on convergent thinking, by shaping their minds in terms of being able to do repetitive tasks, and not contemplating this idea that we're in an era of information abundance. And he literally says we're killing creativity in our students. And so I have a proposal to improve that. But ultimately, that, to answer your question specifically, that sort of went into the design of the public school system in the United States originally.
Yeah, that TED Talk, has changed my life. It put words to exactly what I felt from my educational experience. I love in that TED Talk, he just talks about, if you ask first graders how many of you are an artist, they'll all raise their hands. And by like 5th grade, you ask, how many of you are artists, and you'll get 2 or 3 hands. It just, that model of education, that convergent, that right answer is the only answer, just has a way of sucking out and drawing away that creativity and that passion. I love what you talked about in terms of information scarcity versus abundance. And, when information was scarce, we talk about great learners as being someone who, is curious, And I think that came from that era of information scarcity, because curiosity was the attribute or the skill that would give someone sort of the motivation to go and discover new knowledge and information. And I think as we move into that world where, as you said, knowledge is a commodity, that now there's other attributes that distinguish, the student, the lifelong learner, what we need to learn. And so many of those are sort of entrepreneurial attributes, as you come to talk about. But right now, when we think about, so we're kind of stuck at this inflection point, this moment where we've had this model that is a reflection of the past. As you advocate for a future of entrepreneurial education, what is holding us back from getting there? What do we need to do to help more people embrace kind of this mindset, as well as this approach inside of our schools?
Yeah, I mean, this has been one of the major thrusts as to why I wrote this book, because I've seen over the last 5 years being on the board of the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, I've seen this over and over again, this mindset shift, this development of confidence, this development of being an entrepreneurial learner, this idea that you actually have a lens of how to create economic and social value. And so I've seen this over and over again, but I reached this point of frustration because there is a knowledge gap, there's an educational gap. People actually don't even think about entrepreneurship as a learning method oftentimes. And so yes, we've reached 1 million students, but I think there's an education gap. And so really this is the primary reason I wrote the book, was for people to sort of really contemplate what it looks like, both through storytelling of actual student examples like we talked about, through the lens of teachers, but also through a lot of research that talks about what the future of work looks like. Ultimately, and I talk about this later in the book, there are 30,000 units. It's secondary education alone. There are 30,000 local units of change is what I refer to. And so to answer your question even more specifically, why it's so difficult is that we have this incredibly decentralized model of education in K through 12. And even if the federal government has relatively little sway over what happens. And so you can see some schools innovate and you can see others lag behind, but it's very hard to actually move something throughout the educational system. And of course, there are tremendous inequities in the educational system as well. And that's such a critical factor in the equation as well. So
yeah, just clarify for me, you referenced 30,000 units of education. So by that, you mean the fact that we have schools, 30,000 schools, each of which is in a different district in a different state, is sort of run at that local level instead of at a unified federal level. Is that what, to clarify that?
Yes. I'll be very specific about it. There are, in secondary education, which is roughly, ages 11 through 18, there are roughly 14,000 school districts. And there are big districts like, LA, New York are the two, and Chicago, 2 or 3 of the largest, and all the way down to small ones. But there are 14,000 local school districts, and there are 90,000 school board members that oversee those 14,000 school districts. Now, on top of that, you've got 13,000 private schools that are serving students between 11 and 18. And then you've got 3,000 charter schools. So in total, that's 30,000 what I call local units of change that each have a large degree of autonomy with regards to what they do in their schools. There's a lot more schools than 30,000, but that's what I would call the unit of change. It's the district level, or it's the private school entity, or it's at the charter school level. So that's to answer your question very specifically.
Got it. Helpful. So, I mean, it just comes down to we've got to win a lot of hearts and minds, sort of one by one, to really advance to where we need to go.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think the other big issue is, and this has been my observation with my own kids. I mean, another big motivation for me writing this book is I'm a parent of 3 kids, and I've got twins that are 13, and I've got a 10-year-old. And what I see in young people today is they are so much more capable because they're empowered with all the information in the world in their pocket, and because they have these digital tools, which the prior generations didn't grow up with. They are able to think and solve problems and be creative in ways that we couldn't have imagined growing up. And so you see 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, and I can give you some examples, but they're just tremendously capable. And my view is that there's a lot of human potential that we are not tapping into by not providing this educational experience to young people at the right age when their mindset is developing. And I just think that the level of human potential that we could unlock through this educational method and learning method is just tremendous.
So that reminds me, in the book you share your personal experience that inspired you to write this, and it was a family sort of experience in your children. Share that story with everyone. That moment sort of inspired you to actually do this.
Yeah, I in chapter 2, it's called The Pivotal Moment. And it's the summer of 2016. I'm with my 3 kids. My twins are 9 at the time, my boy-girl twins, and my younger daughter 6, and my wife Jennifer. And we spent the summer in Germany. I worked for SAP, big software company headquartered in Germany. I'd taken on a new executive role that required me to sort of interact with executives in Germany. So we ended up spending the summer and living there. And one Saturday afternoon, it was raining. We were looking for something to do. So we go to this Audi museum, Audi, the car manufacturer. And attached to it is a factory. And so, we've seen these cars from 100 years ago, and it's super interesting. The kids are having a great time jumping in the cars and having fun at this sort of museum. And then it's time for our factory tour. And our factory tour guide, Hans, grabs us. And so, go through this long tunnel. We put these sort of shields on our face. And he opens the door and he says, by the way, this is all confidential. Our competitors, BMW, Mercedes, we can't let them, know any of this stuff. So this is all confidential, no recording. So he opens the door. And what do we see? We see these amazing, massive robots that are assembling cars with a level of precision that looked like it was out of a science fiction movie. And we go through the tour, and Hans says, look, he's got this chart on the wall. And he says, look, here's how many people were required to assemble the number of cars in this factory over the last 20 years. And it's this downward slope rapidly approaching 0, to the point where there's very few people left, just sort of supervising the robots, if you will. And then he says, and guess what? When we start to apply artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotic process automation to the rest of our company, you're going to see a lot of unsuspecting white-collar workers be out of work. And he basically just said that. And, I've been in the industry for a long time. I follow these trends around the future of work, but I'm sitting there with my kids, 9 years old, the twins, and the 6-year-old, and I'm sitting there saying to myself, what jobs are going to be left for them by the time they're ready to seek employment? And that was sort of the moment to the summer of 2016 in Germany, where I'm sitting with my kids, where I'm saying, you know what? It's time to start thinking a lot differently about how to prepare my own kids for this radically different future upon us. But I also want to, share this with everybody so that everybody can benefit from these sort of, methods that I outline in the book, so that everybody can prepare themselves for this tremendous change we have upon us.
So, you were there at Audi, and it's this reflection of the fact that so much of these changes is being driven by the change in the workforce. In chapter 4, you talk about conscious capitalism. What is it, and to what extent do you see it starting to take root and actually be practiced out there across the workforce?
Yeah, so a lot of chapter 4, I outline sort of 3 major trends shaping the future of work. One is sort of automation, and there's been a lot written about that. And I talk about how that's creating sort of a realignment of what skills are most valuable in the future of work and what educational experiences. I talk about the gig economy, which of course has been cited a lot. But conscious capitalism is one of the most interesting things that I think is upon us. And effectively what conscious capitalism is it's this idea of multi-stakeholder capitalism. If you look at the roots of capitalism in the United States, they were heavily influenced by a 1970 article by Milton Friedman in the front page of the New York Times, where he basically says the single purpose of a corporation is to maximize profits for shareholders. And if you think about that for a second, what he's saying is the sole purpose of business or capitalism is to make rich people richer. You take their money, and if you do anything other than maximize their wealth and the returns on their investment, then you are actually either in violation of the law or in violation of the guidelines as he set forth. And I think that's done tremendous damage. It's created a lot of wealth. There's no question about that. But it's created a lot of externalities, like in the environment and pollution, and not necessarily taking care of your employees as well as you could, or your customers. So conscious capitalism has basically 5 or 6 major stakeholders. Of course, shareholders matter and profit matters. Everybody knows that. But you've got to take care of your employees. That's another stakeholder. Your customers are another stakeholder. Your suppliers are stakeholders. The environment is a stakeholder. Your community is a stakeholder. So conscious capitalism is this idea that, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can earn a profit and you could serve shareholders' interests, but at the same time, you could be good by your customers, good by your employees. You can, minimize the impact you have on the environment, maybe even improve the environment, improve your communities. And so that's sort of this more holistic view of capitalism that I think is so foundational and so fundamental. And that's why I dedicate a big portion of the book, because I want younger people to see, what happened, and why this sort of very narrow view of capitalism took shape. And then be sort of, be an impetus for change and mandate that companies vote with your wallet in terms of who you're buying products from and who you choose to work for. You can have a lot of influence, and there's a lot of organization going on social media to kind of force companies. So I think that we're on this precipice where people have realized that the current environment is not sustainable because the wealth inequality has been is reached a point where it's off the charts. The level of injustice and racial inequality is a major factor as well. And so I think we're at this turning point where the system is either going to move more towards conscious capitalism and a more holistic view, or there's going to be pretty dramatic consequences, which we're already seeing to some extent, if companies are not moving in this direction, and if young people don't sort of rise up with this mindset towards conscious capitalism.
Totally agree. I mean, in my own personal experience, I know as an entrepreneur, as a business founder and owner, we treat that Milton Friedman article. I didn't even know what it was originally, but it's almost like this Hippocratic oath of being a business person, an entrepreneur, an operator, which is this fiduciary duty, that you have this fiduciary duty to your shareholders, that everything has to be optimized to their end. And I remember the first time that was cited to me, that I had a fiduciary duty. And, I remember thinking, like, says who, where? Like, I didn't sign anything ever. I didn't raise my right hand and say, swear an oath to, to always operate to the optimization of shareholder, and quite the opposite. Our founding principles were that, we were going to put the learner first, that, we were in this to affect our mission, even if it, meant not being revenue maximizing. But it really does have this very powerful sort of force now, almost this de facto sort of assumption through the economy. So, love conscious capitalism, that thought is being challenged now. I think, it's nascent, it's early days. As you mentioned, we've got to sort of vote with our dollars, with our feet, with where we work, with who we support. Really appreciate that. But that, before we jump into the actual entrepreneurial mindset, talk to me about, why do you call it the entrepreneurial mindset, not the entrepreneurial skill set? What is the difference between sort of that skill set, the mindset, and why did you really orient this book around mindset?
Well, first of all, Dave, I would just say that, you've been a real thought leader in this way. If you look at what you did with Degreed, you talk about, look, Degreed is not your family is your family. And I think you've done a lot of things that both serve shareholders' interests and also are to the benefit of employees and customers and communities. And so I think you've been a tremendous leader in this regard of advocating for conscious capitalism. And I think if I look at what you're doing now with Learn In and even Book Club, getting these ideas out there. So I just want to say, hats off to you for being a real leader in this idea of conscious capitalism. To your question of gearing this towards mindset versus, say, skill set, I think that the idea behind the mindset is that it is timeless. Okay, it is the notion that the mindset transcends whatever skills happen to be valuable this year or next year or the year after, whatever hard skills, let's say. I'll distinguish between sort of hard skills and, sort of, some people call soft skills. I don't really like the term soft skills. I talk more about mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset specifically. But the reason I focus on that, again, it comes back to thinking about my own kids and looking at these trends shaping the future of work. And at the end of the day, this sort of exponential pace of change. And my argument is this, that the obsolescence rate of hard skills is going to mirror the exponential pace of technological change. And so you may learn a certain hard skill, and that may be valuable for some period of time, but it's probably not going to last all that long, because the nature of the change is exponential. And so what is it that is this steady state, this timeless notion that regardless of whatever hard skills you have to learn to create economic or social value, either as an entrepreneur or in the public sector or in a nonprofit or wherever else, that it's this notion of mindset that is timeless. And so this is why with my own kids and with our NIFTY students, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, we usually say NIFTY, and just in general, I talk about mindset because ultimately it's the mind. It used to be you could learn a skill and you'd ride your career out for maybe 30 or 40 years on one skill, even doing a repetitive task. And those days are over. And the future is all about this exponential pace of change. And so yes, you have to learn hard skills. There's no question about it. But you also have to be aware that those hard skills are probably going to become obsolete at a much different rate than they had in the past. And so what survives is this mindset, the idea that figuring out what skills you actually have to learn to add value economically or socially. And so that's why I focus on mindset as opposed to skill set, because the mindset is timeless no matter where you are in your career or in the process. That carries you through the entirety of your working life, let's say.
So you've now taken us right into sort of the inner chamber of the entrepreneurial mindset. Share with us, what makes up that entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah, so there's 8 domains that make up the entrepreneurial mindset. And I think it's useful to think about it as sort of a process flow almost. Like if you think about the process of developing a business plan or building a business plan, where does it start? It starts with ideation. And so there we have 2 domains. One is what we call a future orientation. And so this is the idea that you're constantly examining what the future looks like, how trends and dynamics are shaping the future, if you will, knowing where the puck is going, not where it is if you're a hockey fan. But it's this general idea that you are analyzing and understanding and thinking about how trends are changing the world around you. So that's a future orientation. The second domain is what we call opportunity recognition. This is the idea that as you're sort of canvassing the landscape, ultimately you have to be able to zero in on an opportunity to create economic or social value. And so it's a mindset of looking across the future landscape and then zeroing in on, okay, you know what, I think this actually could be an opportunity to create economic or social value. So that's sort of the ideation phase. And then you think about the next 2 domains, which are really around problem development and solutioning to that problem. So on the problem side, we think about critical thinking and problem solving skills. So understanding how big of a problem is this that you're identifying? Who's impacted by this problem? What is the market opportunity around this problem? Who's currently addressing the problem and how are they addressing that problem? So that's sort of critical thinking and problem solving skills. And then the next domain, which I get asked, what is the most important of the 8 domains? The next one is creativity and innovation. This is the one that I argue is the most important if I had to pick one. But creativity and innovation is saying, okay, you know what, I've done my ideation and I've defined the problem, but now I'm going to figure out what is a new product or a new service or a new business model or a new approach, a new way of thinking about how to solve this problem. And so it's all about this creative energy and innovation and identifying this sort of solution to the problem, but doing it in a different way than it's ever been done in the past. I mean, that's the definition of entrepreneurship and innovation. And so then you get to, okay, well, I've got a solution, and now I want to execute on it. And what do I need to actually advance the ball, let's say, on moving this solution forward? Well, the first thing is you need initiative and you need self-reliance. So, and this is what the educational method teaches you, is that nobody's going to pick up the ball and run for you. You have to pick up the ball and take the initiative and move that idea forward. And so this idea of initiative taking, proactively. And then when you think about sort of building teams, because ultimately, you're only going to do so much on your own, this idea of communication and collaboration with other people. So you have to be able to communicate your ideas persuasively to all the different stakeholders that are involved around your idea. And you have to be able to collaborate with people with lots of different skill sets, lots of different cultural backgrounds, lots of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so this idea of being able to communicate and collaborate with other people. And then finally, it's this idea of the fourth dimension is sort of overcoming obstacles. This is really critical, right? Because at the end of the day, you could have the best idea and you could have the best team, but you're going to run into obstacles, especially in a world where the pace of change is exponential. And so the final two domains are flexibility and adaptability. So it's this ability, this very human ability to adapt to challenges as they arise and overcome obstacles. And then the final dimension is comfort with risk. I think in the future of work, everybody has to realize that we're all swimming in a sea of risk. And we're swimming in a sea of risk because we live in an era of exponential change, of volatility, of uncertainty, of complexity, of ambiguity. And so this idea that you have to get yourself comfortable that you're in this sea of risk. And it has to be comfortable to you, first of all. And second of all, you have to be able to look at what are the risk and reward trade-offs with decisions that you make as you're sort of moving your initiative forward. And ultimately, you have to overcome obstacles, but you have to do it in a way that optimizes this sort of risk-reward equation. So in totality, those are the 8 domains of the entrepreneurial mindset. It's something that's very powerful when you go through the process over and over again. The more you do it, the better you get. And at the end, the goal is to impact the mindset. It's not so much the skill set, it's to be empowered with this entrepreneurial mindset.
I think of just everything you just took us through, which is a lot, but I mean, I think contrast that against, some of what is still prevalent in like my children's education today, which is, we're going to have you learn your cursive handwriting, repeat, the same letter again and again. What mindset does that give our kids? What does that say about, what is valued versus this expansive sort of risk, tolerant, exploratory willingness to engage in sort of the unknown and sort of that future proofing our kids. I mean, I just think, I listen to you talk and I want that for my kids. I want that for others. I mean, but when we get to the fact that school in so many ways is really bad today at a lot of that, when we contrast what you just said to high stakes testing, to standardized testing, to so much of the way school works, we almost by the very nature of school, we've got to be able to assess students. We need to know if they're getting it, if they're making progress. How do you begin to measure something as sort of ethereal as a mindset? And what's, is it important? Is it important that should we give students an entrepreneurial grade? Should we give a kid an A minus, a B plus for, the pitch on stage of their startup idea? How do you go about translating mindset into our education system? And what's the importance of how we frame this?
Yeah, I think this question of measurability has been one of the major barriers to adopting things like project-based entrepreneurship education in our school system, because there is this notion that if you can't measure it, it's either not worth teaching or you bucket into this sort of elective, camp, like things like art and, physical education and so on. And so, through the process of really 30 years and working with a million students, we at the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, we developed what we call the Entrepreneurial Mindset Index. And what it does is it basically is the beginning of the educational experience. Other than to say, come up with your idea, it's your idea, you own it. You're also sort of teaching the 8 domains of the mindset, and then you're actually taking a test. It's a very different kind of test, but you're identifying strengths and weaknesses of a student within these sort of 8 domains that I just sort of walked through. Now, what does that test actually mean? Really, at the end of the day, what you're measuring is what we would call a student's internal locus of control, or more simply put, their self-confidence. In these different 8 domains. And what you find if you study industrial and organizational psychology, or a lot of other branches of sort of the marriage of psychology and the future of work and education, you get to this place where one's ability to believe that they can control their future, they can control their destiny. Not to say that there are lots of factors that are always beyond our control, because that's a given. But when a student actually believes that they can control their own destiny, that's a huge predictor of their ability to be successful and to be satisfied with their career. So with this entrepreneurial mindset index, and it uses Qualtrics, so I'm at SAP, and it's a company that we acquired, and so I'm quite proud of the work that that Qualtrics has done with Nifty in this regard, because I think it's incredibly innovative. What you get is effectively a self-assessment, where a teacher can then take that information and say, effectively your confidence around communication and collaboration is relatively low compared to your flexibility and adaptability, or your creativity, or whatever dimension you're looking at. So it's not designed, and I want to be very clear about this, it's not like the SAT in the sense where you're saying someone scored a 1400 and someone scored a 1200 and someone scored a 1600. That's not it. It's not designed to compare student A to student B, because at the end of the day, it is too subjective. So it's not a measure of the propensity for one's entrepreneurial thinking of one student versus the other. Instead, what it is it derives self-learning for the student to identify areas of opportunity, and then it empowers the teacher to say, okay, I've got sort of this roadmap. I've got an idea of where a student's confidence is high and where it's low, and then I can customize their learning experience, their project-based entrepreneurship educational experience, to accentuate their strengths and build upon their weaknesses. So this is called the Entrepreneurial Mindset Index. There's some other things out there that are similar to this, but I do believe this idea of taking a pulse check, if you will, of a student's level of confidence or their internal locus of control along these dimensions, and using that as a pathway to prescribe their sort of learning experience, is incredibly powerful. And so we've tested this with over 10,000 students already. It's relatively new, but we've gotten some great results from those tests, and we've seen how much a student's level of confidence will go up in those areas when they take the test, the Entrepreneurial Mindset Index, after their entrepreneurship educational experience. So that's a little bit about measurability, and I do think it's a really important part of the equation, because you have to have some way of measuring this. The other way, of course, of measuring this is you got competitions. You have business planning competitions, and just like Shark Tank, you've got judges who are entrepreneurs themselves, or business leaders, or government leaders, or whatever, and you're presenting your business plan, and ultimately there's some winners. You have a local and regional and national competitions, and so that's the other way of sort of measuring the experience, is how well are you advancing in these competitions. So those are sort of two dimensions of measurability around entrepreneurship education for young people.
Yeah, you skied over it in sort of your answer there, as well as a little bit earlier, but at the core of this is the fact that it's project-based, that it's unique to the student, that it's sort of centered around their thinking, their ideas, their ambitions. Again, that's very divergent, that's very new and different for our education system. But why is it important that this is project-based? Why not have every student work on building even the same website or sort of the same idea? What's the importance of the project base and sort of the personal nature of how you frame this entrepreneurial education approach?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a few different dimensions to this. And I mean, project-based learning in general, I think, is a movement that is very positive, and you can apply it to a lot of different areas. There's one thing, though, that's really unique, and again, what I refer to as the quintessential learning method about entrepreneurship, which is it puts the student in a position to actually have to think about how will they create economic or social value. And so by defining a project with that lens, and if you think about, all of us grow up to be in the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofits. I mean, we are working in some capacity. Some are entrepreneurs, some are not, but at the end of the day, you're creating economic or social value. And so one element of the experience is it gives the student at a younger age this ability to actually start to think about creating value economically or socially. There is no parallel that I've seen in the educational system that actually has a student start to think about not only how to create economic value or how to create social value, but what role do they specifically play in creating that value. And so the project element, there's that piece of it as regarding our entrepreneurship, I should say. The other element about the project is, and I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again because it's so important, is it puts the students' interests, their passions, at the centerpiece of the learning experience, because they decide what the project's going to be. They decide what they're going to build. And I cite a study in the book about how you actually can't think deeply about things that you don't care about. And you could question the study, you could read about it in chapter 7 of the book. But I think we all agree that when you have a level of passion about something, your ability to push bounds push boundaries, to learn, to go the extra mile, to learn more, to do more. That's another element of sort of the project-based experience, is that you teach it. And then a last dimension of the project-based experience, which I think is so critical, is that it provides a natural way for students to connect with mentors. You know, there's so many people that want to mentor, that want to help our next generation, you know, that have so many valuable experiences to share, whether they're an entrepreneur or an investor or a business leader or a government leader, nonprofit, university, you name it. Everybody has value to provide to the next generation. But it's so difficult to orchestrate a mentorship program, because where do you start? What's the common ground? How do you meet a student where they are? And this is sort of this beautiful thing about the project-based entrepreneurship experience, is because where the mentor is meeting the student is at the project. That's where the connection point happens. And so what happens then is this sort of magical thing where the mentor is working alongside the student to help them advance their business plan, to help them think about something differently. Maybe they have industry expertise or functional expertise that they can help the student with. And so this magical element of project-based learning regarding entrepreneurship is it provides a natural way for mentors to come together with the student, and ultimately they're working together. You know, it's not just I'm providing you advice or I'm providing you counsel or I'm helping you think about that. I'm helping you build a business plan to prepare you to present in a competition. And I'm helping you think about what your passions are and what you're good at and what you're not and what you need to work on. And so it's this beautiful element of bringing mentors together with students, with the centerpiece being the project. And that's how mentors meet students where they are.
So you talk a lot about mentors, which I love, and I think it makes such a difference not only for students. I mean, in the workplace. I mean, just that human-to-human connection. You talk about it's really hard to care, to learn about something we don't care about. And it's a great way to do it. But talk to me about, so you reference mentors, but what is the role of teachers in all of this? And is this something that should be taught as a discipline? I go to math, I go to English, I go to entrepreneurship, or is this something that every teacher, irrespective of the domain that they're teaching, should incorporate into their education?
Yeah, I think the answer is both. I mean, you can leverage the project-based learning methods from entrepreneurship within math, within English, within science. And so I encourage, and if you look at the deployments of NIFTE, the implementations of NIFTE, they actually roughly break out 50-50. So it's a great question you asked, because it is both. It is applying these project-based learning techniques within the context of an existing subject. But on the other hand, it also is a separate subject in and of itself. And my bias is more towards the latter, because ultimately, if you think about entrepreneurship, it is the ultimate multidisciplinary learning method. Because ultimately, when a student picks their topic, they have to go across whatever dimension or whatever area they have to go into to learn, to build their business plan. That's where they go. So it cuts across all different disciplines. I use an example in the book. I talk about Sandra Cruz, who's a teacher at Thomas Edison School in New York City. Amazing woman, amazing teacher. She taught different subjects for about 25 years. And a few years ago, she said, you know what? I see how the future of work is unfolding. And I want to not just teach my students hard skills. I want to help shape their mindset for the future of work. And so she, as a teacher, had to go through this process of learning what it's like to be what she calls a sage on stage, where you're taking information and communicating it and having them effectively regurgitated on a test. So she said, I used to be a sage on the stage, but now I'm a guide on the side. And so her role has changed from one thing to another, which is being more of a coach in the process through the sort of educational process. So Sandra Cruz is a great example of how she's taken entrepreneurship as a standalone subject and how that's changed her teaching method in the classroom.
So towards getting to the end of the book, you reference Einstein's eighth wonder of the world, which I had never actually heard it identified that way. But tell us Einstein's eighth wonder of the world, and why did you give us this analog?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, so I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll explain why I use the analogy. Einstein's eighth wonder of the world, and this is his. You can Google it. This is his view. is he uses a compounding interest. He says compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And he goes through this sort of logic around, the earlier you invest in interest or dividend bearing investments, the better off you are over time, because interest earns interest on itself, or dividends earn dividends on themselves. And so when you look out over 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, you get this dramatic compounding effect because you invested early. On the flip side, if you wait too long to invest in interest or dividend bearing investments, you don't get to these sort of exponential returns. You don't get to the eighth wonder of the world. And so I use this analogy that this is how I view project-based entrepreneurship education. That by the earlier you can get, and there's some probably logical minimum, we tend to focus on middle school. I mean, I think you can definitely get younger than that, but certainly age 10, 11, 12, students are very ready for this. But the earlier you introduce this idea, empower them with this educational experience, the dramatic trajectory implications, there are much more dramatic trajectory implications. I talked about Dagum, but there are thousands of examples that we've seen over and over again where when you light that fire and you provide this level of empowerment to young people early and often, because like you, I learned entrepreneurship in startups. I did a couple startups, shortly out of undergrad. That's how I had to learn entrepreneurship. You learned it as a founder and starting your own companies. We didn't learn that in school. But the earlier you learn that in school, the compounding returns are incredible, because they start to apply this entrepreneurial thinking to all the different aspects of their life as they build their career and as they build their life. So that's why I use Einstein's eighth wonder of the world as a little bit of an analogy there.
And you use that to lead up to this sort of clarion call that this is something that we need to prepare all students for the 21st century. This is something that would benefit all students. And how do we actualize that? How do we bring this and make it real across what you said earlier, 30,000 sort of, unique units of education? How do we actually make good on bringing entrepreneurial education to all students?
So first of all, I do want to reiterate the point that I do believe that this is an imperative and required educational experience for every young person, because I believe that in the future of work, entrepreneurial thinking is applicable everywhere. And it's just a function of the fact that when you've got exponential change, you have to have a mindset of continuous innovation, continuous reinvention, and you have to be able to apply this entrepreneurial mindset. I have a quote from the Chief Transformation Officer of the Air Force, on the back cover of the book. And she talks about, she was an entrepreneur and she never thought that she would, wind up as in the Air Force. But here she is applying entrepreneurial thinking to the defense of our country. And she makes this great case about how what they're trying to recruit is actually entrepreneurial thinkers into the United States Air Force, because this dramatic disruption and change. And so and you could apply this to any element of the private sector, public sector, or as an entrepreneur or in a company or wherever ultimately you wind up. This entrepreneurial mindset and this educational experience, I believe, is a requirement for everyone. So that's number one. How you do this is a much tougher question. The example I use in the book is the initiative Computer Science for All, which was announced at the White House in 2016 by President Obama. And this is the recognition that coding skills are necessary for all students. It's a language that every student must learn, which I agree with. And 15 years ago, if you surveyed parents, very few would have said, "Oh yeah, I think that is necessary in schools." But now 9 out of 10 parents say they want their kids to learn software coding skills because they view it. And so what I use this analogy of, you've got this big problem, which is you've got 30,000 local units of change. And so you can only do so much on a top-down basis. You really have to build as a grassroots campaign, bottoms up. You have to get to the school board members of the local school district and help them understand, the value of this. And so this is really why I wrote the book, because this is not something that you can't, even if the President of the United States and Congress said, we're going to set aside billions of dollars and we're going to go do this, you still have to get local buy-in from all of these 30,000 local units of change. And here I'm just talking about, secondary education. I think this is applicable to, universities, and I think it's applicable, even earlier. But this is why it's so difficult. And so I wanted to write this book because I wanted people to read the stories and understand the stories of how this educational experience has changed the trajectories of so many lives. But also look at the research. I did a tremendous amount of research and data gathering to sort of make the case for why this educational experience is so important. Effectively, we've had a recalibration of what educational experiences are most valuable, what skills are most valuable in the future of work, and I think this learning method addresses those. There's a lot of things that need to be done. We could talk a little bit more in detail, but at the end of the day, it has to be a grassroots effort, similar to how Computer Science for All has unfolded since it was announced in 2016. It probably had a 10-year or 15-year runway leading up to that. They've gotten 1,000 partner companies. Microsoft has jumped in, and many other companies and many other stakeholders, many nonprofits and many business leaders. They've all rallied around this idea that, especially in underserved communities, and this is really so critical, that the areas that are underserved, and this is where at NIFTY, where we spend most of our time, is in low-income communities where they have much less investment. And so there has to be this sort of grassroots movement around what I call entrepreneurship education for all. But it starts with getting educated. It starts with learning about reading the book, learning about it, and then ultimately taking action, getting involved as a mentor, asking your school board members, is this something that you're thinking about putting on into the curriculum? Go to a competition, I think, is really critical. As I said, mentor a student, visit a classroom, but just in general, getting involved in sort of seeing for yourself, not only reading the book, but seeing for yourself how powerful this is. And then ultimately, it's a movement, right? It requires everybody. It requires an ecosystem. It requires a lot private, public sector collaboration. And ultimately, it has to be a grassroots, local level initiative. It's just the way that our educational system is designed. But I wrote the book with that in mind. That anyone who reads the book is going to get a sense for why this is so valuable and why this is so important and why we should effectively start to line up around this movement to bring entrepreneurship education to every middle and high school student in the United States and ultimately around the world.
Kyle, I appreciate it. It needs, as you said, it needs to be a movement. It has to happen grassroots, sort of, with our advocacy going into, our school boards, our principals, our teachers, and, asking if this is something that they would consider, it's something that they want. And I would just end by saying, this is something I know I would have benefited from. I mean, this is certainly something I, want for my children. I mean, to hear you talk and the mindset that you've outlined, it's something I aspire to for my kids. So I appreciate you getting out there and leading this clarion call for this movement and for the entrepreneurial mindset for everyone. Let me just, again, close with a thank you and a reminder that please go get the book. In this case, all of the proceeds are going to NIFTY, so every purchase of the book is another action that everyone can take to further this cause. It directly goes to benefiting those students, getting them on stage, supporting those programs and those competitions. Kyle, thank you again for being here with us, and look forward to seeing where this movement takes us this week, next week, the years to come.
Yeah, and Dave, thank you so much for having me. And again, you're doing just tremendous work to get ideas like this out there, because at the end of the day, we're still sort of at the idea stage. And I do want to reiterate that all the proceeds go to NIFTY, as you mentioned. We set it up on the website. It's NIFTY, NFTE, nifty.com/e-mindset is the website for the book. And we've set it up so if, like, say you want to order 10, you can make a donation for $150 to NIFTY, provide a ship to address, and then 10 books will come your way. Keep one for yourself or your family, and then give them away to other people that you think can benefit from learning this. We're trying to build this sort of network effect around this movement and making it very easy for the proceeds to go directly to NIFTY, but looking at sort of taking these books and distributing it to get the word out. So again, Dave, congrats on your success with Book Club. I think this is a fantastic venue for these ideas to be shared, and really enjoy the conversation today. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.